The morning fog clung to the pine trees like ghosts reluctant to leave. At the northern edge of Cedar Ridge, Montana, where the paved road turned to gravel and then to trail, stood the dark planked cabin everyone in town preferred to forget. The wood, blackened by decades of acid rain from the old copper mines, seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The windows, when seen from afar, resembled empty eyes watching the town sprawled in the valley below. Inside, Marcus Santana woke to the same nightmare as always. The dry crack of an IED exploding under the Humvee, Afghan dust entering his lungs like ground glass, the screams of Corporal Mendez, whom he couldn't pull out in time. The kid's face, because that's what Mendez was, a 19-year-old from Texas who talked about his mother every day, still appeared every night, asking for help Marcus couldn't give. The military clock on the nightstand read 04:47. He always woke at this time, the same moment of the explosion 3 years ago. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days to be exact. Marcus counted the days not by choice, but because his brain had been reprogrammed for military precision, for the hypervigilance that saved lives on the battlefield, but destroyed souls in civilian life. He rose from the cot, couldn't sleep in soft beds anymore. Too vulnerable, too exposed. His left leg protested, as always, where metal shrapnel had entered and some still remained, too deep to remove without risk of paralysis. The doctors at Walter Reed said it was a miracle he could walk. Marcus felt no miracle, only constant pain, serving as a reminder of his failure to protect his men. The cracked mirror in the makeshift bathroom reflected a man he barely recognized. At 34, he looked 50. His hair, once black like his father's, was streaked with white. Scars mapped his face like an atlas of war. The largest, an irregular gash running from left temple to jaw, a gift from shrapnel that missed, blinding him by 2 inches. His eyes, brown like his mother's who died while he was deployed, had that dull shine civilians called the 1,000-yard stare, the look of someone who'd seen too much to ever be normal again. Marcus ran his hand through his 3-week beard, feeling the irregularities where hair no longer grew over scar tissue. The VA doctor had prescribed antidepressants, anxiety meds, sleeping pills. The boxes remained sealed in the drawer. Pills didn't erase dead faces, didn't silence. Explosions that echoed even in the deepest silence. The cabin had belonged to his grandfather, Jake Santana Jr., an old prospector who died while Marcus was on his 2nd tour in Afghanistan. The news arrived 2 weeks late at a forward operating base in Kandahar. No way to return for the funeral, another abandonment on the list he carried. Grandpa had been the only real family after his father died in a construction accident when Marcus was 12 and his mother succumbed to cancer while he defended an idea of country that now seemed hollow. The property had 40 acres of steep mountain, dense forest, and secrets his grandfather took to the grave. It was the only place where no one bothered him, where he could exist without the looks of fear and pity he received whenever he went down to town for supplies. People crossed the street when they saw him coming. 6'5", 260 pounds of war-hardened muscle, shoulders too broad for normal doors, hands that had broken, and necks but now trembled holding a coffee cup. The cabin's kitchen was Spartan, a wood stove his grandfather had installed in the 80s, a propane fridge that worked when it wanted to, crooked shelves holding canned food and dry goods. Marcus lit the fire with the mechanical efficiency of 1,000 identical mornings. Coffee, strong, black, no sugar, was the only military ritual that made sense here. The old radio, a Motorola from the 70s his grandfather had modified to pick up military frequencies, crackled local news while the water heated. Businessman Robert Hayes announces new luxury development in the northern region. The Mountain Vista Resort Complex promises to bring development and jobs to Cedar Ridge. Marcus turned it off before it finished. Hayes. The name tasted like bile. Robert Hayes, son of Anthony Hayes, grandson of Joseph Hayes, 3 generations of parasites who'd built fortunes on others' backs. Robert's father had been responsible for closing the miners' cooperative in the 90s, leaving dozens of families without livelihood. Now, the son wanted to turn the mountains into a playground for the rich. Hayes had tried to buy the cabin 3 times. The first, a week after Marcus returned, still on crutches, offered $50,000, a fortune for someone living on military disability. The second time, raised it to $75,000, this time accompanied by associates who looked more like muscle than businessmen. The third, 2 months ago, was $100,000 and a veiled threat about accidents that happen on isolated properties. Marcus poured coffee into the dented metal mug, the same one he'd used in Afghanistan, one of the few things he'd brought back. Each sip was bitter as the memories. Outside, the first birds began singing, oblivious to human demons. The forest around the cabin was dense, old growth in some sections, with trees his grandfather swore were over 200 years old. Douglas firs, ponderosa pines, oaks, that shouldn't exist at this latitude but did, stubborn as the Santanas. That's when he heard it, a weak whimper, almost imperceptible coming from outside. At first, Marcus thought it was another auditory hallucination. Sometimes he heard voices in Pashto, screams in English, explosions where there was only wind, but the sound repeated, weaker still, like a last breath. Instinct took control. Marcus grabbed the 12-gauge he kept loaded by the door, a Remington 870 he'd bought as soon as he returned, knowing ghosts sometimes had physical form. He checked the chamber, unlocked the door with his left hand, while his right held the weapon in low, ready position. Old habits don't die, they just wait. He opened slowly, the barrel sweeping the arc of vision first. Entry technique his body executed without thinking. The morning fog limited visibility to about 30 feet, turning trees into threatening shadows. The air smelled of wet earth and decomposing leaves, the eternal cycle of the forest. What he saw made him lower the weapon, but not release it, never completely release it. A German shepherd lay collapsed on the 3 rotting wooden steps leading to the cabin door. Even through the fog, Marcus could see the animal was in terrible condition. Ribs stood out beneath dull, matted fur, creating deep shadows that betrayed weeks, maybe months of starvation. But it wasn't the extreme thinness that caught his attention. It was the eyes. One ice blue like winter sky over the Hindu Kush mountains, the other golden brown like Helmand sand. Heterochromia. Marcus knew the medical term, but there was something more in those eyes beyond the unusual coloring. They looked directly at him without the instinctive fear wounded animals show. There was no pleading either, just recognition, as if the dog knew exactly who Marcus was, as if they'd known each other in another life, another battlefield. The dog tried to rise when Marcus approached. The front legs gained some traction, but the rear ones failed completely. The animal fell sideways with a cry of pain that pierced something in Marcus he'd thought was dead. There was blood, fresh blood over dried blood, layers of wounds in different stages of healing. The right rear paw had a deep cut, probably from barbed wire that had infected. The smell of infection was familiar. Marcus had smelled the same on war wounds, when antibiotics were luxury and gangrene a constant threat. But there was more. As his trained eyes examined the animal, Marcus catalogued the injuries as he would a wounded soldier. Old scars on the back, too linear to be accidental. Marks from straps or whips. One ear partially torn and healed crooked. Toes on the left front paw at wrong angles, broken and healed without treatment. Burn marks on the right flank, circular, cigarette-sized. This dog knew human cruelty intimately. Someone had dedicated themselves to making him suffer. "Easy, boy," Marcus heard his own voice. Hoarse from disuse. It had been 3 weeks since he'd spoken to anyone besides store clerks, and even then, only the essentials. The voice came out broken, like rusted metal. "I won't hurt you. You've suffered enough." The dog, male, Marcus noted, didn't growl. Didn't try to bite when Marcus approached, even when that would be the normal reaction of a wounded, cornered animal. Instead, the tail attempted a weak movement that might have been the ghost of a wag, as if saying, "I know you won't. You're like me." Marcus set the shotgun against the wall, within reach but not threatening, and crouched slowly. His knees protested, reminders of too much weight carried too long over hostile terrain. He extended his right hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. Basic approach technique he'd learned from the canine handlers in Kabul. The dog sniffed. His nose, dry and cracked when it should be wet and cold, lightly touched Marcus's fingers. And then, in a gesture that destroyed Marcus's last defenses, the dog licked his hand. Just one lick, weak but loaded with absolute trust. "Jesus Christ," Marcus muttered, feeling his eyes burn with tears he hadn't shed in 3 years. "What did they do to you, buddy?" The decision was instant. Marcus slipped his arms under the animal's body, maybe 40 pounds when he should weigh between 70 and 80, and lifted him. The dog let himself be carried without resistance, head hanging but eyes still fixed on Marcus. The smell was strong. Dirt, infection, old and new blood, and underneath it all, the characteristic smell of wet dog and abandonment. The cabin seemed different with the dog inside, less empty perhaps, less like a tomb where Marcus had buried himself alive. He laid the animal on the military blanket in front of the wood stove where heat could reach him. The dog sighed, a deep sound of relief that seemed to come not just from lungs, but from soul. Marcus went for his medical kit, the military backpack, a Male model in faded multicam, contained more medical supplies than food. Israeli bandages, quick clot, expired morphine he kept for the day he decided it was too much, broad-spectrum antibiotics smuggled before discharge, tools of a war that never really ended. He worked with the efficiency of muscle memory. First, assess. The rear paw was bad but not irreversible. Tendon intact, only muscle tissue damaged. Infected, yes, but not gangrenous. The other wounds were superficial, already healing. The real problem was severe malnutrition and dehydration. "We'll start slow," he said to the dog, who watched every movement with those impossible eyes. "Water first, then food. Too fast, and your stomach won't handle it." He took a bowl, his only soup bowl, he realized, and filled it with water, added a pinch of salt and sugar, a homemade saline solution he'd learned from field medics. The dog drank slowly, with dignity, even in extreme need. There was no desperate gulping Marcus would expect, just measured gratitude. While the dog drank, Marcus prepared the first meal. Cooked rice with an egg, simple protein and carbohydrates, easy to digest. He mixed it into a mash and let it cool. The dog ate with the same contained dignity, pausing to look at Marcus, as if verifying this was real, not another cruel dream. "Need a name," Marcus said, more to himself. He observed the animal. The coat, where not wounded or dirty, showed the classic German shepherd pattern. Black saddle like moonless night, legs and chest in shades of brown and gold, but there was something wild in him, something untamed, despite the abuse. "Wolf, I'll call you Wolf." The dog, Wolf now, lifted his head at hearing the name. The tail attempted another weak wag. The following days established a routine Marcus hadn't had with another living being since Afghanistan. He woke, still with nightmares, but now with immediate purpose. Tended Wolf's wounds, which healed with impressive speed once the infection was controlled. Shed his meals, watched the dog gain weight day by day, bones disappearing under rebuilding muscle. But it was Wolf's behavior that really intrigued Marcus. This was no ordinary dog, even by breed standards. He learned commands with a single demonstration: sit, down, stay, come. But more than that, he anticipated needs. When Marcus prepared to go out, Wolf was already at the door. When leg pain worsened, Wolf brought the cane Marcus refused to use. And most disturbing, Wolf seemed to know when nightmares were coming. 3 weeks had passed since Wolf appeared. The dog had gained 20 pounds and his coat was beginning to show the breed's healthy shine. The wounds had healed, leaving only pink lines where exposed flesh had been. But it was the nights that had changed most dramatically. Marcus discovered in the second week that Wolf had a supernatural gift for detecting imminent nightmares. Minutes before Marcus began thrashing in sleep, Wolf would approach. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just placed his paw on Marcus's chest, the weight sufficient to alter sleep patterns without fully waking him. Nights were still difficult, but the complete terrors, those that left him screaming, sweating, reaching for a weapon, had diminished. It was on a cloudy Thursday morning that everything changed. Marcus was splitting wood, physical therapy the doctor had recommended, and which he actually did because split wood meant heat in the brutal mountain winter. Each axe stroke was precise, economical. War had taught economy of movement. Wasted energy could mean death. Wolf lay nearby, watching with that disturbing intelligence. Suddenly, the dog stood. His ears rotated like radar, focusing on something Marcus couldn't hear. The fur on his back bristled slightly, not aggression, but alert. Then he began barking, not the normal bark he'd developed to warn about occasional visitors, lost hunters or hikers who ventured too far. This was urgent, insistent, almost desperate. Wolf ran to the side of the cabin, returned to Marcus, barked, repeated the circuit. "What is it, Wolf?" Marcus set down the axe, his hand instinctively going to the K-bar knife he always carried. "What's wrong?" Wolf led him behind the cabin, where the stone foundation met the mountain earth. The area was one Marcus rarely visited, full of decades of debris, rotted wood from his grandfather's time, tools rusted beyond salvation. Wolf went straight to a specific spot where old floorboards met. The foundation. The dog began scratching frantically, his paws digging at earth and debris with obsessive determination. Dirt flew, splinters of rotten wood scattered. Marcus knelt beside him, noticing Wolf had focused on a specific board, wider than the others. "Wait, buddy, let me see." He brushed away years of dead leaves, cobwebs that looked like shrouds, mushrooms growing in the damp wood. The board was loose, he realized. Not rotted like the others, but deliberately loose. Using his knife, blade, he pried at the edge. The wood lifted with a snap, revealing a space excavated in the earth. Marcus's heart accelerated, the same feeling when detecting a possible IED, when something wasn't right on the battlefield. But it wasn't danger he felt. It was anticipation. There, wrapped in military oilcloth, the kind the army used before plastic, waterproof and durable, were several packages. The first he grabbed contained documents, many documents. The morning light filtered through. Clouds, illuminated papers yellowed with age, but preserved by the oilcloth. Marcus brought them inside, Wolf following like a protective shadow. He spread everything on the makeshift table, a door on sawhorses that served for everything. As he read, his breathing accelerated. Original deeds, not just for the cabin, but for the entire mountain. 40 acres. No, 420 acres. The entire northern range, registered in the name of Jacob Santana, his great-grandfather, in 1892. Official stamps from territorial days, then statehood, decades of county updates, all legitimate, all legal. But there was more. Letters, dozens of them, written in careful handwriting. His grandfather documenting discoveries, theories, suspicions. Marcus organized them by date and began reading, the family history revealing itself like an intelligence dossier. 1952. Found the first signs today. Quartz with gold veins on the north face of the mountain. Dad was right. 1958. The main vein runs at least 600 feet. Estimated grade of 5 grams per ton. A fortune. 1963. The Hayes family found out. Joseph offered me a partnership today. I refused. Threatened to take it through legal channels. We'll see. 1971. Anthony Hayes, Joseph's son, tried to forge documents at the county office, discovered in time, kept the evidence. 1985. Decided not to mine. This mountain is heritage, not commodity. The gold can wait. The land cannot. 1999. Marcus, if you're reading this, you've come home. The gold exists. The documents are real. The haze will come, be prepared. The last entry was from 2018, a year before his grandfather died. Robert Hayes is worse than his father and grandfather combined. Smarter, crueler, tried to drug me to sign papers, failed, he'll return. Marcus, my grandson, soldier like I was, protect what is ours, not for the gold, for honor. Marcus sat heavily. Wolf rested his head on his lap, bi-colored eyes full of impossible understanding. The pieces fit, together now. Hayes's insistent offers, the veiled threats, the rush to buy a falling-down cabin. He knew, always knew, there was more in the hole. Marcus returned and brought everything. Detailed topographical maps with geological markings, ore samples in glass vials, still gleaming gold after decades. Old photos, his great-grandfather with a nugget the size of a quail egg, his grandfather in front of a mine entrance now hidden by vegetation, his grandfather young, in army uniform, holding an M1 Garand, and at the bottom, wrapped in additional plastic, a will, signed, witnessed, but never filed. It left everything to Marcus specifically with a clause: if my grandson doesn't survive the war, let the mountain return to wilderness. Better abandoned than in Hayes' hands. The next morning, Marcus made a decision he hadn't made in months. Go to town with purpose. He put on the only decent clothes he had. Jeans without tears, a flannel shirt his grandfather had left, military boots. Polished for the first time since discharge. He looked in the mirror and saw not the broken ghost as usual, but something new. Or maybe something old, reawakening. Come on, Wolf. Time to show we're still alive. The drive to town was 12 miles of dirt road that turned to gravel, then cracked asphalt. Marcus drove his grandfather's 1995 F-250, more rust than metal, but with a reliable engine. Wolf rode shotgun, head out the window, ears in the wind, as if he'd never suffered. Cedar Ridge was what remained of a mining town. 3,000 residents when the census bothered to count. Main Street with businesses that survived through stubbornness. Houses of wood and unreinforced brick. A 19th century Catholic church that was the only truly preserved building. And at the center of it all, like a cancer of glass and steel, the Hayes Building. 4 stories of bad taste housing the family's businesses. The county clerk's office was in an adapted colonial house, paint peeling, but structure solid. When Marcus entered, the bell above the door chimed, announcing the first customer of the day, or maybe the first customer of the week. Helen Morrison was behind the counter, as she had been for 40 years, white hair in an impeccable bun, reading glasses hanging on a chain, floral dress that could be from any decade since 1960. She looked up and froze. Marcus Santana. My God in heaven, is it really you? Ms. Morrison. He nodded, uncomfortable with the recognition. Need to file some documents. She came around the counter, ignoring protocol, and before Marcus could retreat, hugged him. It was quick, maternal, but broke something inside him. When was the last time someone touched him without being a doctor evaluating injuries? Your grandfather talked about you so much, she said, stepping back, eyes moist. Showed all your letters from the service. So proud. We were so sorry when you couldn't come. I was too. The voice came out hoarse. The documents? Of course. Let's see. Helen examined everything with professional eyes that had seen thousands of documents in 4 decades. As she read, her eyes progressively widened. She took a magnifying glass, examined stamps, watermarks, signatures. Marcus, my God, this changes everything. These deeds predate any other claim in the Northern Range. They're territorial documents with all state updates. You're the rightful owners of... She did quick math. 420 acres, the entire Northern Range, including... She stopped, face paling. Including what, Ms. Morrison? Including where Robert Hayes is building his resort. He bought that land from the county 2 years ago, but if these documents are legitimate, and they are, I can attest, the county sold something it didn't own. The silence stretched, heavy with implications. Wolf, who had been waiting quietly beside Marcus, raised his ears, focusing on the door. A low growl began in the back of his throat. The door opened violently, the bell protesting. Robert Hayes entered, followed by two men Marcus immediately recognized as Muscle, not by appearance, but by how they moved, how they occupied space, how their hands stayed always near pockets that certainly contained weapons. Hayes was smaller than his arrogance suggested, 5'8" at most, compensated by Cuban heels that made him look ridiculous rather than imposing. 50 years poorly lived, beer gut disguised by Italian suit, hair plugs fooling no one. But the eyes, small, porcine, intelligent, were dangerous. Santana, the name came out like spit. Heard you were messing with old papers. Legitimate documents, Hayes. Marcus didn't move, but his body changed subtly. Weight distributed, ready for action. Muscle memory from 1,000 confrontations. Papers can disappear. Hayes approached, his men flanking. Accidents happen, county offices burn, people vanish. Are you threatening me? Marcus's voice dropped an octave, the tone he used with Taliban prisoners. In front of a witness, I'm not threatening anything. I'm offering a civilized solution. 100,000 for the cabin and the papers. You disappear from Cedar Ridge. Go live your miserable, broken veteran life somewhere else. Wolf moved. Didn't attack, just positioned himself between Marcus and Hayes. The growl was now audible, deep, promising violence. One of the Muscle reached for his pocket. I wouldn't touch that. Weapon, Marcus said calmly. My dog is faster than you, and if he's not, I am. You're alone, soldier boy. A crazy with PTSD and a mutt. I own this whole town. Then the door opened again. Father John entered, 70 years old but still imposing at 6'3". Behind him, a line of people began entering. Maria from the grocery, Jorge from the pharmacy, Pete, the mechanic, Anna the teacher. Within minutes, the small office was packed. Robert, said Father John, his voice carrying moral authority from 5 decades of service. Enough. We all know what you and your family have done all these years. The lies, extortions, forgeries. We stayed quiet from fear, but seeing Jake's grandson here, fighting alone, no, enough. You don't know who you're messing with, Hayes snarled, the veneer of civility cracking. We know exactly, responded Maria, 60 years old, 5 feet tall, but fierce as a lioness protecting cubs. We know about the workers you didn't pay, the families you evicted, the land you stole, and we also know the state prosecutor would love to know about certain irregularities in your businesses. Hayes retreated, face red with rage. He looked around, saw faces that had always bowed now standing straight, looking back without fear. His power, built on intimidation, was evaporating. This isn't over, he hissed at Marcus. You'll regret this. I already regret a lot of things, Marcus responded, but protecting what's mine won't be one of them. The following days were preparation for war, a different kind than Marcus knew, but war nonetheless. He fortified the cabin discreetly, trail cameras positioned at strategic points, barbed wire disguised on approach trails, improvised alarms with cans and wire. Wolf patrolled constantly, his sharp instinct detecting threats before they materialized. The community, energized by the confrontation at the county office, began organizing. They created an informal surveillance system, always someone. Passing by the cabin road, checking. Maria sent food. Father John visited to talk about old times, but really to check Marcus's mental state. Pete the mechanic fixed the F-250 for free. Payment for defending the town. But Marcus knew Hayes wouldn't give up. Men like him, with wounded ego and threatened fortune, were more dangerous than IEDs, predictable in their unpredictability. The first retaliation came subtle. The cabin's phone line, already precarious, was cut. Then the access road appeared blocked by fallen trees that had clearly been sawed, nails scattered on blind curves, small terrorisms to isolate, intimidate, break morale. Marcus responded as he'd learned in Afghanistan, adapt and overcome. He bought a satellite phone with his savings, cleared the road with his grandfather's chainsaw, collected the nails, kept them as evidence. Every action by Hayes was documented, photographed, catalogued. It was Wolf who detected the first serious attempt. 3 in the morning, 2 weeks after the confrontation at the county office. The dog woke Marcus, not with barks, but with insistent pressure of his paw on his chest, then pulling the blanket. When Marcus got up, Wolf led him silently to the back window. 3 figures moved in the darkness, carrying what appeared to be cans. Moonlight revealed liquid reflections, gasoline or diesel. They were going to burn the cabin. Marcus grabbed the hunting rifle, a .308 Winchester with night scope he'd bought exactly for this. Not to kill, but to deter. He went out the side door, Wolf following like a shadow. He circled the intruders, positioned himself on high ground. The first shot hit the can, exploding fuel over the man carrying it. The second and third were into the air, but the message was clear. The invaders ran, leaving behind not just the cans, but a wallet that fell in the panic. George Hayes, Robert's nephew, known troublemaker with a record for assault. More evidence. The next morning, Marcus went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Ferreira was a tired 60-year-old man waiting for retirement, but he was honest, a rarity in Cedar Ridge. Attempted arson, he said after examining the evidence. With this, I can get a warrant. Hayes will buy witnesses, intimidate others. Probably, but now there's an official record. And, Ferreira lowered his voice, I'm sending copies of everything to the state police. Hayes has tentacles here, but they don't reach that far. While the legal battle developed, Marcus and Wolf explored the mountain, now officially theirs. Using his grandfather's maps, they found the old mine entrance, hidden by decades of vegetation. Wolf sniffed the path through dense bushes, his certainty suggesting impossible knowledge of the terrain. The entrance was sealed with wood and stones, but poorly, as if his grandfather wanted to discourage casual entry, but not prevent determined access. Marcus removed the barrier carefully, revealing a tunnel that descended at a gentle angle into the mountain. With flashlight and Wolf in front, they entered. The air was cold, damp, but not stagnant. There was ventilation somewhere. The walls showed careful, professional work. Not amateur prospector excavation, but real mining. 50 meters in, the tunnel opened into a chamber, and there, Marcus stopped, jaw dropping. Gold. Veins of gold running through the walls like frozen lightning. Not just traces, but veins thick as fingers, gleaming under the flashlight. On the floor, abandoned tools and canvas bags. When he opened one, nuggets the size of hazelnuts rolled out, but there was more. In a side alcove, wooden crates stacked. Marcus opened one and found not gold, but documents. Meticulous records of extraction done by his grandfather and great-grandfather. They'd taken enough to live, never more. And they documented every ounce, paid taxes on every sale. All legal, all proper. The last crate contained letters, correspondence between the Hayes family and various authorities over decades, bribes offered and accepted, threats made, inadvertent confessions of crimes. His grandfather had collected evidence for 50 years. My God, Wolf, Marcus murmured. The old man assembled a complete dossier. This isn't about gold, it's about justice. Wolf barked once, as if agreeing, then froze, ears erect, fur bristled. Danger! Voices came from the tunnel entrance. Multiple, approaching. Marcus killed the flashlight, pulled Wolf behind a rock formation. His hand went to the Glock 19 he now always carried. 3 men entered, flashlights sweeping. Marcus recognized Robert Hayes' voice. Has to be here. Old Jake wasn't subtle. If there's an entrance, we'll find it. Boss, another voice, nervous. What if the soldier shows up? The soldier is dealing with another problem right now. I had Sheriff Ferreira arrest him for discharging a firearm in a residential area. He'll spend the night in jail at least. We have time. Marcus smiled grimly. Ferreira was smarter than he looked. Must have let Hayes think he had control. The men approached the main chamber. When their flashlights illuminated the gold veins, they gasped collectively. Son of a bitch, Hayes whispered. It's more than we imagined. Millions, tens of millions. How do we get Santana out of the way? Simple. Accidents happen in old mines. Cave-ins are common tragedies. Who's going to question if an unstable veteran died exploring dangerous tunnels? The threat was too much. Marcus was about to move when Wolf acted. The dog emerged from the shadows like a ghost, silent until he was on the nearest thug. The man fell screaming, Wolf on his gun arm. The others spun, confused, flashlights searching. Marcus used the distraction. He came out of cover, Glock in Sul position, voice commanding, "On the ground, now! Hands visible!" Training and instinct. Two men obeyed immediately. Hayes hesitated, calculating. "You won't shoot. You're military. You have honor." Had. The war took it along with my good leg. What's left has no problem shooting thieves and murderers. You have no proof of anything. Marcus smiled, and there was something in the smile that made Hayes step back. "Wolf, fetch!" The dog released the thug, who moaned, holding his chewed arm, and went to the alcove. He returned, dragging one of the evidence crates, papers spilling. 50 years of evidence, Marcus said. Bribery, extortion, forgery, and now conspiracy to commit murder. I recorded your entire conversation, by the way. Modern technology is wonderful. He showed the small digital recorder he always carried. Useful PTSD paranoia. Hayes tried to run. Marcus didn't need to shoot. Wolf took him down in 3 strides, standing on his chest, growling in the businessman's face until he wet himself. The trial was a circus. Hayes hired the best lawyers from Denver. But evidence was evidence, especially when corroborated by witnesses who, encouraged by Marcus's courage, began to speak. Unpaid. Workers testified. Illegally evicted families told their stories. The state prosecutor, smelling blood in the water and a promotion, was relentless. But Hayes's defense had an ace up their sleeve. On the 3rd day, they called a surprise witness, Major Carlos Mendez, retired military psychiatrist. "Did you examine Sergeant Santana?" "Yes, during his medical discharge evaluation." "What was your diagnosis?" "Severe PTSD with dissociative episodes, paranoia, violent tendencies. I recommended psychiatric hospitalization, but he refused treatment." Marcus felt the world spin. This was in his medical file, but should be confidential. "So, in your professional opinion, is Sergeant Santana reliable as a witness?" A man in his mental state can confuse fantasy with reality, can interpret innocent actions as threats, can even fabricate evidence to support his paranoid delusions. The prosecutor objected, but the damage was done. Marcus saw it in the jury's eyes. Doubt planted. That's when Wolf, who'd been allowed in court as an emotional support animal after Father John argued his necessity, stood up. He walked to the witness, sniffed, and then did something no one expected. He sat in perfect military position and raised his right paw, the salute military dogs learn, but not to Marcus. To Major Mendez, the psychiatrist paled. The prosecutor, sensing something, improvised. "Major, do you recognize this dog?" "No, no." Wolf barked once, then executed a series of commands. Without anyone speaking, down, crawl, play dead, fetch, specific military commands in specific sequence. "Curious," the prosecutor said. "This dog appears to be military trained. Mr. Santana, where did you find this animal?" "Abandoned at my door, injured and starving." "Major Mendez, do you happen to know anything about abandoned military dogs?" The major was sweating now. "Perhaps you can explain," the prosecutor continued, producing a document, "why your name appears in this report about theft and illegal sale of retired military dogs to fighting rings?" The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "And perhaps," the prosecutor was in momentum now, "you can explain your relationship with Robert Hayes, who coincidentally bought 3 guard dogs from you last year." The major broke. He confessed not just the scheme selling military dogs, but that Hayes had paid him to discredit Marcus. He'd falsified the psychiatric diagnosis. The case turned. Hayes was convicted not just of the original crimes, but obstruction of justice, bribery, animal cruelty. 15 years in prison, loss of all assets to pay reparations. 6 months later, the mountain was unrecognizable, but in a good way. Marcus had used part of the gold to create the Jake Santana Foundation, a recovery center for veterans with PTSD. The original cabin was preserved as an office, but around it, smaller cabins were built to house recovering veterans. The program was unique, traditional therapy combined with working the land, service dog training, and most importantly, a community of people who understood. There was no judgment when someone woke up screaming, no shame on bad days. Wolf, officially identified as Kaiser, a retired military dog given up for dead in action, became the program's head dog. His ability to detect panic attacks and nightmares was studied by veterinarians and psychiatrists. But more than that, he taught other dogs, passing on knowledge in ways that defied scientific understanding. Helen Morrison visited weekly, bringing papers that needed notarizing, an excuse to check on her boys, as she called the veterans. Father John gave optional mass on Sundays, more conversation than sermon. The entire town had adopted the center. On a spring morning, Marcus was teaching a new resident, Corporal Silva, 22 years old, lost his leg in Syria, how to read anxiety signs in his new service dog when Wolf barked. Not alarm, but announcement. A van was coming up the road. When it stopped, 2 people got out. A woman in military uniform, a colonel, and a civilian Marcus recognized from the news, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Sergeant Santana, the colonel saluted. Colonel Patricia Santos, Special Operations Command. This is Secretary. I know who he is. Marcus didn't salute, he was retired. What do you want? We want to replicate this, the secretary said, gesturing to the center. 100 locations like this, across America. Veterans caring for veterans. You'd be the national director of the program. No, the answer was immediate. I don't leave here. This is my mission now. We understand. That's why we're bringing the mountain to Muhammad, so to speak. The program would be based here. This would be the training center. You wouldn't need to leave, but would train others to establish similar centers. Marcus looked at Wolf. The dog tilted his head, as he always did when important decisions arose, then wagged his tail once. Approval. Can I think about it? Of course. But Sergeant, the secretary paused. What you've built here is extraordinary. You've saved lives. You could save thousands more. That night, Marcus sat on the porch of the original cabin, Wolf at his feet. The full moon illuminated the mountains, turning trees into silver sentinels. Below, in the new buildings, lights showed life where there had been only darkness. Occasional laughter floated on the night air, the sound of healing happening. What do you think, buddy? He asked Wolf. Ready for another mission? Wolf stood, put his paws on Marcus's lap and licked his face. Then went to the door, picked something up and brought it back. It was Marcus's old military beret, stored since retirement. The message was clear. The Jake Santana National Veterans Recovery Center now occupied the entire northern range, 420 acres of hope where there had been abandonment. Marcus, now Honorary Colonel Santana, supervised a network of 127 centers across America. But this specific morning wasn't about numbers or policies. It was about a moment. Wolf lay in the sun on the original cabin's porch, now 12 years old, muzzle gray, but eyes still alert. Around him, 6 puppies, the last litter with a champion German shepherd, brought specifically to preserve his lineage. Each puppy was already destined for a veteran who needed them. Marcus watched from the door, coffee in hand. His leg barely hurt these days. Nightmares still came, but less frequent, less intense. Beside him, Corporal Silva, now an instructor at the center, adjusted his prosthetic. You know, Sarge, Silva said, when I got here I wanted to die. Literally had the date marked. I know. Wolf knew too. That's why he didn't leave your side those first weeks. How did he know? Marcus looked at the dog, who returned the gaze with that impossible intelligence as always. I think he recognizes broken souls, maybe because his was broken once too, and he knows. Broken doesn't mean beyond repair, just means you need the right care. One of the puppies, Bold, was trying to climb Wolf to reach the top of his head. The old dog tolerated with saintly patience. When the puppy finally succeeded, it barked triumphantly. Wolf responded with a deep sigh that could be interpreted as canine laughter. "Think he knows?" Silva asked. "How much he saved?" "He knows," Marcus answered with certainty. "Always knew. From the day he showed up at my door, he knew exactly what he was doing." The sun rose over the mountains, golden like the metal that financed everything but was never the true treasure. The true treasure was the saved lives, healed souls, ghosts finally resting. That afternoon, during the weekly meeting where veterans shared stories, Marcus told the complete story for the first time. How a broken soldier was saved by a broken dog. How together they discovered that purpose doesn't die with trauma, it just transforms. How a mountain of secrets became a mountain of healing. When he finished, the silence was reverent. Then, one by one, each veteran in the hall stood, not at military attention, but in something deeper: respect, gratitude, recognition. Wolf, lying at Marcus's feet, lifted his head and looked around. His eyes, one glacial blue, the other golden brown, passed over each face. Then he did something he'd never done before. He howled, long, deep, primordial. A call that echoed through the mountains and was answered by dozens of other dogs at the center. It was farewell, everyone knew. The old warrior was passing the torch. 2 days later, on a foggy morning that recalled that first morning years ago, Wolf didn't wake. He died as he lived, in peace, in purpose, at home. Marcus found him on the porch, facing the forest, as if standing guard until the last moment. The funeral was worthy of a war hero. 300 veterans attended. The American flag covered the special casket. The honor guard were all veterans saved by him. Even the Secretary of Defense attended. But it was the moment after the burial, on the hilltop overlooking the entire center, that was etched in memory. Wolf's puppies, as if commanded by ancestral instinct, formed a circle around the grave and howled. The sound carried through the valley, through the town, perhaps through the entire country, announcing that the guardian had departed, but his legacy continued. Marcus stayed there long after everyone left. When the sun set, painting the mountains gold and red, he finally spoke. "Thank you, buddy, for finding me when I was most lost, for showing me that broken can be beautiful, for teaching me that saving others is how we save ourselves. Rest now. I'll take it from here." A breeze passed, making the tree leaves whisper. For a moment, just a moment, Marcus swore he heard a distant bark. He smiled, tears finally falling free. The town no longer feared the veteran in the cabin. The town celebrated the man who transformed pain into purpose, isolation into community, an abandoned mountain into a beacon of hope. And in every dog trained at the center, in every veteran saved, the spirit of a German shepherd with impossible eyes continued his vigil. Because some stories don't end with death, they just transform into legend. And legends, as Marcus Santana discovered, never really die. They just wait for the next broken soul who needs to believe in miracles.